Mass Psychology of Fascism. This is a commentary 4, and this is on Chapter 2, The Authoritarian Ideology of the Family in the Mass Psychology of Fascism. Starting off with a quote, an excerpt that he takes out of Mein Kampf. So this is a Hitler's words. Potentially could have been, what do you call it, a ghostwriter. This broadness of outline from which we must never depart, in combination with steady, consistent emphasis, allows our final success to mature. And then, to our amazement, we shall see what tremendous results such perseverance leads to results that are almost beyond our understanding. That makes me think of, you have this, which is the broadness, but the combination of steady emphasis, national security. Like with national security, we have to do this for, you've got to give up supposedly the rights that you forfeit. You've got to give it up because of national security. We have the right to spy on everybody because of national security. It even goes back to the implementation of the drafts throughout American history, or in any country really, but we'll just deal with America for the sake of argument. The implementation of the drafts were done because of national security. So, national security means preservation of the state. But then you get into why that becomes relevant. Like if you take in the case of Vietnam, where you had war resistors. The war resistors were the youth that were being compelled to go to war, and while in some cases their families did support them as a whole, the resistance to war was equated with a resistance to violence. Therefore, there was no resistance movement other than of protesting, but on the sense that there was at the same time there was a recognition though that this entity called the state is claiming the right to kill my son, and the state was claiming that right based on a right to defend itself. I have the right created a threat, the Gulf of Tonkin kind of initiation, everything, the domino effect. I have a right to defend myself, and therefore I can use any means of defense necessary, including the acquisition of your son towards my ends, which may result in great bodily injury, mental degradation, or even death itself. And the only means of resistance you have are none. And you see the exemplified best with Kent State and Jackson University shooting of students by state agents. Okay, we're going into this here. Alright. What was the basis for the alliance in the psychology of the masses? The answer to this is supplied by the social position of the lower and middle class public and private officials. The economic position of the average official is worse than that of the average skilled industrial worker. This poor position is partially compensated by the meager prospect of a career, and in the case of the government official, by a lifelong pension. Thus, dependent upon governmental authority, a competitive bearing towards one's colleagues prevails in this class, which counteracts the development of solidarity. The social consciousness of the official is not characterized by the fate he shares with his co-workers, but by his attitude to the government and to the nation. It consists of a complete identification with the state power. In the case of the company employee, it consists of an identification with the company. He is just as submissive as the industrial worker. Why is it that he does not develop a feeling of solidarity as the industrial worker does? This is due to his intermediate position between authority and the body of manual laborers. While subordinate to the top, he is to those below him a representative of this authority and enjoys, as such, a privileged moral, not material, position. The arch personification of this type in the psychology of the masses is to be found in the army sergeant. That was just, I love that one. That's amazing. Butlers, valets, and other such employees of aristocratic families are a flagrant example of the power of this identification. By adopting the attitudes, ways of thinking, and demeanor of the ruling class, they undergo a complete change and, in an effort to minimize their lowly origin, often appear as caricatures of the people whom they serve. This makes me think too of the meaning of life from Monty Python, the waiter scene where he takes him to his home and explains to why he became a waiter. Um, this identification with authority, firm, state, nation, etc., can be formulated, quote, I am the state, the authority, the firm, the nation, close quote, constitutes a psychic reality and is one of the best illustrations of an ideology that has become a material force. At first, it is only the idea of being like one superior that stirs the mind of the employer or the official, but gradually, owing to his pressing material dependence, his own personal and refashioned, his whole person is refashioned in line with the ruling class, always ready to accommodate him to authority. The lower middle class man develops a cleavage between his economic situation and his ideology. He lives in a materially restricted circumstances, but assumes gentlemanly posture on the surface, often to a ridiculous degree. He eats poorly and insufficiently, but attaches great importance to a decent suit of clothes. A silk hat and dress coat become the material symbol of this character structure, and nothing is more suited for a first impression appraisal of the mass psychology of a people than its dress. That's very, I'm going to get in trouble after I'm done reading this. It is its accommodating attitude that specifically distinguishes the structure of the lower middle class man from the structure of the industrial worker. How deep does this identification with authority go? Now see, because of this America, and I'm a fan of Baldwin, race, there is no taking race out of the equation. I don't care what social accomplishments claim to be made. So on that note, this is, in one sense, you can look at it as a Polaroid, a template. It's very hard to grasp that there's a control factor, an intent factor going into the processes, these processes. He is making an observation that they exist, and in one sense, there is an organicness to them, and it's an effect of social conditions is what his primary point being. I don't know where he's going exactly, but there is as much as the higher ups are victims of this, and the reason they get higher up is because in one sense they're more sensitive to this. There is a degree in which, at a certain level of authority, one, and it can be seen in two things. That's why I say intentional. Is when you read Plato's Republic, such as Book 4, when he's discussing the psychological structure required in order to have a militarized state. And taking into context that at the time that he's saying it, his solution is that there has to be a life after death. In the life after death belief system, there has to be a place to go of torment and suffering if you don't meet certain standards. The significance is that while now the concept of hell is pretty much widespread amongst all religions, and that that place exists, at the time that Plato places Socrates, or Plato's around, Hades was not a place of torment. There was not an option between going to heaven or Olympus with the gods and going to Hades for people that were bad. Everybody that was human went to Hades. So from his point of view, he was looking at that. He had the capacity, Plato through Socrates had the capacity to review the current psychological effect of that kind of afterlife and realized, well, we're going to have to get rid of this if we're going to want to make a stronger imperialistic republic style society. And so, in this, the identification of authority, I see this as the Buddhism has a phrase that goes, "After great good comes great evil," and I would say that after the what's known as the 1950s civil rights movement, what you saw was a collapse, and it wasn't an organic collapse. It was just like Black Wall Street. It was very hardcore. Probably the pinnacle of it was, well, there's a couple. There's not, see, this catch is, it's not really a pinnacle because it just elevates and it gets completely out of control. But mine would, my own assertion would be that Obama is a pinnacle, and that being the equivalent of what I call um, a politically explosive incendiary device. An IED, like an IED, the way IEDs are used in war, I say it's a PED, politically explosive device, and that's equivalent to what the Roman patricians or patriarchs or patriots, the political maneuver that they used in order to subjugate the revolting plebeian class, which is second class, lower middle class, and that was that they offered them senators and the ability that they can be viable candidates for the consul position, which is basically like a president at the time. And they still to this day you can read history and say like one of the greatest consuls the Rome ever had was a plebeian. And so, but it didn't amount to anything for the greater living conditions of the general plebeian class or community. And so you see in today's, well, we'll just deal with one of the most brutal ones, is that like during the Reagan-Bush administration with the Iran-Contra, where it's undisputed fact that cocaine, and this was not the only time because they did this with heroin, using the FBI used the mafia to flood the streets of Oakland and Harlem with heroin, super cheap heroin that they got from Versailles, that they got from the Middle East, and that's all through the mafia train. Um, but the cocaine importation that was accompanied with the Iran-Contra, and that was all flown into Mena, Arkansas, by George Bush's CIA, George Bush Jr. Senior's CIA, to Mena, Arkansas, under Bill Clinton's gubernatorial administration, and then it was dispersed primarily to black communities. And where you see how this works is that it was when George Bush, who was overseeing the entire apparatus of this structure, then became president, and as a show tough on crime, which is actually ruthless to black, he intensified the penalties for with the creation of crack, and he intensified the penalty for the possession of crack, where a half gram, which is half my finger, of crack was a mandatory minimum sentence of 5-year felony in prison, and 5 kilos, or close to 10 pounds, or even if you want to do 5 pounds, it could be just 5 pounds or 5 kilos, but 5 kilos, 5 pounds would be 2 kilos, of powdered cocaine was also mandatory maximum 5 years. Now you see that's not a mistake. So, but it makes but he eats poorly and insufficiently, but attracts great importance to a decent suit of clothes. That makes me think of the Sunday attire that's famous for the black community. Again, I'm not a fan of the black church. In my thing, Plato's in the Republic, it talks about the importance of destroying new musics, and I see that the black church is a fundamental tool used to destroy the rise of the blues, which is a truly because new music is not some easy to come by event. Okay, let's see here. Okay, authoritarian societies fight against the sexuality of children and adolescents, and the consequent struggle in one's own ego takes place within the framework of the authoritarian family, which has thus far proven to be the best institution to carry out this fight successfully. Sexual desires naturally urge a person to enter into all kinds of relations with the world, to enter into close contact with it in a vast variety of forms. If they are suppressed, they have but one possibility: to vent themselves within the narrow framework of the family. Sexual inhibition is the basis for the familial encapsulation of the individual, as well as the basis of individual self-consciousness. One must give strict heed to the fact that metaphysical, individual, and familial sentimental behavior are only various aspects of one and the same basic process of sexual negation, whereas reality-oriented, non-mystical thinking moves along with a loose attitude towards the family and is at the very least indifferent to ascetic sexual ideology. What is important is the connection. What is important in this connection is that the tie to the authoritarian family is established by means of sexual inhibitions. That is the original biological tie of the mother of the child to the mother, and also of the mother to the child, that forms the barricade to sexual reality and leads to the indissoluble sexual fixation and to an incapacity to enter into other relations. The tie to the mother is the basis of all family ties. In their subjective emotional core, the notion of homeland and nation are notions of mother and family. Among the middle class, the mother is the homeland of the child, just as the family is the nation in miniature. This will enable us to understand why the Nazis, the Nazi National Socialist Goebbels chose the following words as a motto to his 10 Commandments of the National Socialist Almanac in 1932. And he goes on to say, Mother's Day, the idea of mother is, this Goebbels, the idea of mothers is inseparable from the idea of being German. Is there anything which can lead us closer together than our mutual honoring of the mother? And at the same time, the subjugation of women. And I said that that's what the core, I've been saying that before I got into this, the core of fascism is to cut the bond between the mother and the child, because once you do that, the child loses all capacity to to understand who they are. The mother is a representation of their life and their body, and sexual exploration is the first time they make a distinction between them and the mother. Okay. This is something. This is what I say. This is dangerous because this is Goebbels talking about Jews, but this is important in America for blacks and Hispanics and Indians to recognize this is what the average white child is raised in through their home, believing as a fundamental core principle. Whether they conflict with it or contradict it, that's secondary. This is primary, and this is this is the core crux of America. And this is Goebbels' statement printed in the brochure. I don't even know how to read it. As an interest in this contention, it is written in answer to the question whether a Jew is a man. Or you could look at it like this: whether a black is an American, whether a Mexican is an American, whether an Indian is an American. Okay, if someone cracks a whip across your mother's face, would you say to him, "Thank you"? Is he a man too? One who does such a thing is not a man, he is a brute. How many worse things has the Jew inflicted upon our mother Germany, and still inflicts upon her? He, the Jew, has debauched our race, sapped our energy, undermined our customs, and broken our strength. The Jew is the graphic demon of decay, begins his criminal butchery of people. That's important to recognize because that's the sentiment of the majority of white America towards black America. Okay. In the individual structures of the masses of the lower and middle class, national and familial ties coincide. These ties are especially intensified by the process that are not only run parallel to it, but actually derived from it. From the standpoint of the masses, the national Führer is a personification of the nation. Only insofar that this Führer actually personifies the nation in conformity with the national sentiment of the masses does a personal tie to him develop. Insofar as he knows how to arouse emotional family ties in the individual of the masses, he is also an authoritarian father figure. He attracts all the emotional attitudes that at one time were meant for the strict but also protecting and impressive father, impressive to the child's eyes. In discussion with National Socialist enthusiasts about the untenability and contradictions of the Nazi program, one often heard it said that Hitler understood all of that much better. Quote, he would manage everything all right, close quote. Here we have a clear expression of the child's need to be for the protective attitude of the father. In terms of the social reality, it is the need for the protection on the part of the masses of the people that enable the dictator to manage everything. This attitude is on the part of the masses of people impedes social administration, i.e. rational independence and cooperation. No genuine democracy can or should be built upon it. Even more essential, however, is the identification of the individuals in the masses with the Führer. The more helpless the mass individual has become owing to his upbringing, the more pronounced is his identification with the Führer, and the more childish need for protection is disguised in the form of a feeling at one with the Führer. This inclination to identify is a psychological basis for national narcissism, i.e., of the self-confidence that the individual man derives from the greatness of the nation. The reactionary lower middle class man perceives himself in the Führer, in the authoritarian state. On the basis of this identification, he feels himself to be the defender of the national heritage of the nation, which does not prevent him likewise on the basis of this identification from simultaneously despising the masses. Basically, I think for the sense that he knows in the back of his head they betrayed him, and confronting them as an individual. The wretchedness of his material and sexual situation is so overshadowed by the exalting idea of belonging to the master race and having a brilliant Führer that, as time goes on, he ceases to realize how completely he has sunk into a position of insignificant, blind allegiance. The worker who is conscious of his skills, he, in short, who has rid himself of the submissive structure, who identifies with his work and not with the Führer, with the international working masses and not with the national homeland, represents the opposite of this. He feels himself to be a leader, not on the basis of his identification with the Führer, but on the basis of his consciousness of performing work that is vitally necessary for society's existence. What are the emotional forces that are at work here? And I'm just going to keep going for the sake of time. Okay. In times of quiet bourgeois democracy, two fundamental possibilities are open to the industrial worker. Identification with the bourgeois, the rich elite, the top capitalists, if you want to call them that, the wealthy, successful, the millionaire, or today it's the billionaire, which holds a higher position in the social scale, or identification with his own social class, which produces in its own anti-reactionary way of life. To pursue the first possibility means to envy the reactionary man, to imitate him, and if the opportunity arises, to assimilate his habits to life. That's the wealthy. So if you want to be like the guy Wolf on Wall Street, if you want to be like that, you got to be like that. To pursue the second of these possibilities means to reject the reactionary man's ideologies and habits of life. Due to the simultaneous influence exercised by both social and class habits, these two possibilities are equally strong. The revolutionary movement also failed to appreciate the importance of seemingly irrelevant everyday habits. Indeed, very often turned them to bad account. The lower middle class bedroom suite, which the rebel, the communist, the agent, the Occupy Wall Streeter buys as soon as he has the means, even if he is otherwise revolutionary minded. The consequent suppression of the wife, even if he is a communist. The decent suit of clothes for Sunday, the proper dance steps, and 1,000 other banalities have an incomparably greater reactionary influence when repeated day after day than thousands of revolutionary rallies and leaflets can ever hope to counterbalance. Narrow conservative life exercises a continuous influence, penetrates every facet of everyday life, whereas factory work and revolutionary leaflets only have a brief effect. Thus, it was a grave mistake to cater to the conservative tendencies in the worker by giving banquets as a meaning of getting to the masses. Alright, whatever. Alright, I got another one. This is very interesting right here too. I think about this. In early capitalism, besides the sharp economic divisions between bourgeois and proletariat, the business owners and the employees, there was an equally sharp ideological division, and particularly a structural division. The absence of any kind of social policy, the emasculating 16, indeed 18-hour workday, the low standard of living of the industrial worker, classically described in Engels' Condition of the Working Class in England. It's important to understand capitalism was born in England. precluded any structural assimilation of the proletariat to the bourgeois, from the employee to the what do they call a self-reliant business owner. From the The structure of the 19th century proletariat or employee was characterized by a meek submission to fate. The psychological mood of the employee, including the peasantry, the unemployed, was one of indifference and apathy. The business owner's thinking was lacking. Consequently, this apathy did not hinder the sudden outbreak of revolutionary sentiment. If suitable occasion arose and did not prevent these sentiments from developing to an unexpected intensity and resoluteness. In later stages of capitalism, on the other hand, it was different. If an organized workers' movement had succeeded in winning socio-political improvements, as shorter working hours, franchisements, social security, this had the effect of strengthening the working class. But at the same time, a contrary process set in. With the raising of the standard of living, there was a structural assimilation into the middle class. With the elevation of one's social position, one's eyes turned upward. In times of prosperity, this adaptation of middle-class habits was intensified, but the subsequent effect of this adaptation in times of economic crisis was to obstruct the full unfolding of revolutionary sentiment. I say that's like with the whole debate over the minimum wage. What you had you had an argument where it looked like the argument was two-sided in the American government, where they were saying Obama came out saying that he wanted to go for a $9. The Republicans were saying no, the minimum wage raise, because it hurts the business owner. The Democrats, and then Obama came in and he started saying, well, you know what, I support a $9 an hour raise. And what that got is the media put in those two perspectives. But there's two other elements that got overshadowed to show you how political system works. So the two that got overshadowed was that the Democratic Party members, like Nancy Pelosi, and I don't have any affiliation for them, but they had a plan that was to raise it, if I'm not mistaken, to something like $11. But because of the lack of press, most people thought, look at how good Obama is. He's trying to get it up to $9. At least he's doing something. While even behind the scenes, there was a group of activists that have been trying to push for living wages, and that's more along the lines of something like $15 to $20. But what you saw is, because of the way the argument was structured, is the typical person, like the people I work with, who would have benefited, who I always work with, restaurant workers and everything, who would have benefited immensely from this, from any of those raises. At the most, they were only able to fixate on the minimum wage. And so that's the gist of chapter 2 is a lot, so my commentary is cut short. Lucky you.